you've been doing these drawings for a while where you just sit down with a sketchbook, you've got a pen, and you just draw totally out of your head all of these character designs. Now, for me, that is such a foreign concept because I cannot draw from my head. How did this come about?
Side effect of working with my friend Mike, drawing comics direct. That was sort of an exercise we used to do. Mike's a guy that I've known for a really, really long time, like since we were in elementary school. Initially, it was a social thing for us, and our first Halloween back home, and we decided to have a ghoul off where we both tried to draw like the best and like weirdest looking ghosts that we could think of.
Totally out of your head.
Totally out of our
No
imagination.
references.
And so it was more like this back and forth of trying to come up with like funny kind of visual puns. I worked much better when I didn't have the option to sort of erase like a pencil mark.
In your sketchbooks now, you really have to commit because there's no option to go back.
And I just love what that brings out of my drawing.
Your confidence increases the more you do it.
Oh yeah. It's all about just laying down a line and really thinking about, before you put the line down, like sort of your intention with it, trying to like kind of picture where you want to go with it, lay that line down, but then also have the confidence to be like, well, regardless of whether this line turned out exactly the way I wanted it to, I'm now going to adapt sort of my intention for this sort of character design. I think I do kind of hesitate in between lines. Like I kind of lay one down, then think, then lay down the next line. So it is like a very fast process, but it's very methodical.
You have to constantly react to what's happening in the piece. You can't go back and fix it. A lot of it has to do with you being confident, or do you feel not confident? Because I feel like a lot of people, this would be a very stressful exercise because they don't have the option to fix it. So are you just saying, you know what, I don't care, what happens, happens, or are you just so confident that you feel cool with whatever happens?
If I just put, say like a line right here, and then I was like, oh, that's not what I wanted, and then just like start it over, that drives me crazy. Because then this line,
that lone mark,
it's just floating there and it's meaningless. Just no matter like how bad it turns out, I have to finish
so
this
it's
drawing.
Almost a compulsion to complete the cycle of the drawing.
Yeah.
But you don't care how it comes out at all?
No, because I'm gonna fill the page with more, you know?
So it's really a quantity thing, that because you're gonna do so many of these, you're not so precious. How do you start drawing from imagination? Because to me, I can't do that at all. I have to have some sort of reference.
The silhouette is sort of the overall shape of the figure that you would see if you were to say like backlight it so that the entire figure was just blacked out. So if I were to draw like a Clara silhouette right now, it would be like,
what it look like to you?
Purely the outline.
Do you start the drawing that way though, or is this what you're visualizing in your head?
This is sort of what I'm picturing in my head. What kind of silhouette I want to start with. Like if I'm going to draw the figure tall or short, sort of wide or thin. One thing that's kind of a fun cartooning exercise is to think of, just put down a shape arbitrarily, how to turn it into a figure.
So that's just some random shape.
Yeah, that was
made,
just
and now you're
a mark
saying,
I put down.
How do I turn that into a character?
I drew that by first doing this kind of Q-tip shape, actually, because...
Why a Q-tip?
The Q-tip specifically is because in college, when I first met Lauren, she used to talk about me to the other like kids on her floor and refer to me as the Q-tip because my head is so big and my neck's so skinny and I don't have any shoulders.
So this idea of a Q-tip is embedded in your identity.
Yes. Caricatures of myself, for me to just start there, it's like an easy thing where I can think more purely about these sorts of ideas, about proportion, without worrying about like what my intention is with who this character is, because it's me. This character is going to have a big nose, so I'm going to draw him in profile. So I started with that. It comes out, just sort of follows. Like
builds
it's me
off
just sort of
the big nose.
Yeah, it's sort of stream of consciousness. You start to think of the sort of relationships you can build between other parts of the body. You don't have to have a big nose. You have to have a small body as well, or a small, tiny ear. I like to create what I call a visual rhyme with that shape. I've decided that triangles are going to be an important part of this figure, so I'm going to repeat those triangles throughout the image. So with my eyebrow here, I'm going to, again, exactly mirror this triangle here, and the triangle of the mouth sort of pointing the opposite direction.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And you can start to think of things that way.
You have the same shape repeated,
yeah,
and then you like mirror them.
Yeah.
So you have symmetry as a concept and you have repetition.
Yeah. And
As a
it's fun because
concept.
once you start using symmetry, you can start breaking those rules as well. Right now, I'm working very geometrically with this character,
Mhm.
but if I decided for the body to be a little bit more sinewy and weird with my arms, that's a totally like out of left field thing to do.
When I look at your sketchbook drawings, they feel so spontaneous and all over the place and really fun. But then to discover how logical your thinking process is really surprising. I like this idea of doing this as just a warm up to get your wheels turning.
I know the first few drawings that I do are going to be throwaways anyway. Put some marks on paper and then just force myself to turn those marks into something, even if it doesn't look good. What if I had the nose sort of extending so much that it's sort of like going into my mouth and like kind of choking the figure, like as grotesque as that is?
That's
like
awful.
I start
This whole sequence is your nose, you're swallowing your nose?
Oh, well, what if the nose is, it's not structured at all. It's just this kind of amorphous thing that's kind of like growing out of control. And it sort of grew into this,
It's
pun
pretty
intended,
upsetting.
this really upsetting image of just like,
This one I think is upsetting.
notice that you've been drawing one thing or to focus on one kind of aspect of the drawing or one sort of proportion to exaggerate.
I look at the first one you did, it's really stiff, it's really straightforward, not a lot is going on. And then you look at how you go from this to say a drawing like this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that you needed the drawings in between to get there. I don't think
totally.
anybody can start here. I think you got to start here and work yourself that way. So for me, a big part of it is not just the rules and the thinking, but just doing it over and over
Yeah.
and over again. The quantity is so important. Like, how many do you draw all at once in one sitting?
To do these 3 pages, I probably went through 2 episodes of Friends.
So what's that, 40 minutes?
Yeah.
It is simultaneously completely spontaneous, but very logical. Doesn't that seem strange that you could be both of those things all at the same time? Because you described the proportions, the shape, the silhouette. I mean, all of that, when you describe it to me, makes so much sense and it's so concrete.
Especially if you get your mind sort of stuck on one idea, like having this sort of curvature in the back. Like, oh, I just want to get that like right. Like I want that to look.
You do it again.
Yeah.
So
you just keep
instead of
repeating
like
it.
fussing over one drawing for 40 minutes,
Yeah.
you're doing 30 versions and you probably will get better results.
Yeah. And because I'm forcing myself to draw the full figure, I'm not like doing it and then trying to start again. Like not drawing the back and then being like, oh, I don't like that exactly, and then starting over. I've noticed that a lot of my designs have turned out very sort of tall and lanky. Based on my real life height, that kind of makes sense. I'm going to start with a horizontal line. As I was putting that mark down, I just decided arbitrarily that that was going to become the shape of the figure's hair. I already have this ear shape and that feels very geometric. I'm going to try and mimic that somewhere else in the drawing. You do discover a lot, you think of a lot of ideas purely by accident. You know, you make one line that you think is terrible, but then give yourself the challenge of making it work.
Part of this process in some ways is you just accepting everything that happens.
Yeah.
That you don't ever fight your drawing in a way. Like if your drawing ends up being that way, you just accept it.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of artists, that's really hard to do because does anybody ever say to you, oh, I have this thing in my head, I want to draw it and I can't draw it? Like, what would you say to somebody who says something like that, who's frustrated that their drawing doesn't come out the way they imagine it in their head?
Drawings never look the way that you imagine in your head. Like that's totally unavoidable. You have to be open to the process. And that's definitely something that I was not really interested in when I was younger.
So how did you change your mindset though? How did you go from not being okay with things not coming out and now being like, oh, what happens, happens. That's okay.
Well, it's purely out of necessity. Like if you are trying to be a real perfectionist, ultimately you have certain time constraints. Things just aren't going to turn out right. So you kind of have to just, after a certain point, let go. You can either regret that and feel kind of self-conscious and look back at all your work and hate it, or you can just accept that, well, that's not what that drawing was supposed to be. But one thing I'm actually really liking is the tilt of the head, which is something that I haven't really played with that much. The posture of a character conveys a lot.
Why do you think posture matters for character design? What does it express?
It could express that they're tired, or maybe they're lazy, maybe they're in pain, like their back's hurting, or that they have a giant head that's weighing them down. These physical traits you can almost ascribe to almost like a metaphorical sense of who the character is. Maybe he thinks too much.
The organization of the shapes, the posture, the repetition, the symmetry, all of that goes into really saying something about who the character is, what their personality is. I think that's great that there's a correlation there.
You look at Charlie Brown and he's got this giant egg head, and then you look at his stomach and sort of the pattern on his shirt is kind of, it's these zigzags, like almost like he has this upset, like butterfly feeling in his stomach. So you can think about these designs in a sort of metaphorical sense.
You don't start with, I want to draw a villain.
Yeah.
You actually start with, I'm going to draw a triangle.
Well, I think a lot of people start with that idea of like, oh, I want to draw this type of character. And I think that can get you in a lot of trouble. When you picture a character, I don't think you often think of abstract shapes.
No.
Like that's not the first thing that comes to mind. So that's a good reason to explore it.
You draw from life more than anybody I know. I feel like if I sit down with you for longer than 3 minutes, you've whipped out the sketchbook and you're drawing me as we're eating lunch or something like that. So why bother to do that?
It's kind of about building almost a library of reference in my head that I can use when I draw from my imagination. Plenty of things that I'm not good at drawing, like horses, for example.
Why horses?
Because I don't like horses, and it's never occurred to me to sit in front of a horse and draw it. If I haven't drawn something from either photographic reference or from life, it's really hard for me to try and figure out how to draw it just from memory. Wait.
What are you doing?
Can you believe this?
Ready?
Can you believe this? Can you believe this? Can you believe this? Can you believe this? Can you believe this?
Shut up! You're so obnoxious!